I got to confess, I talk about student debt a lot, but there was something that I found to be especially dispiriting about like the tone of the conversation this week. For catching everybody up, in case you've missed it, the conversation is hot and heavy because Joe Biden indicated in a meeting with the Hispanic Congressional Caucus earlier this week that he would be canceling a significant, I think was the word used, amount of debt. It led a lot of people to think that he's definitely going to do 10,000 and he might even be doing 50,000. And there was like a 24-hour period of genuine excitement before the administration walked it back and it became clear that not only was it probably not going to be 10,000, 10,000 is going to be means tested. It's going to be for people who earn under a certain amount of money a year to be determined. I heard some people saying that it wasn't going to apply to grad school debt. There's a million limitations in the world. And they're gonna figure out every sort of way to make this as unappealing as possible.
I am considering dealing with some debt reduction. I am not considering $50,000 debt reduction, but I'm in the process of taking a hard look at whether or not there will be additional debt forgiveness, and I'll have an answer on that in the next couple of weeks.
But during that kind of 24-hour cycle, a lot of people expressed opinions about it. There were a lot of really silly opinions from conservatives that are pretty expected. Mitt Romney very famously tweeted something along the lines of, what's next? Are we going to cancel car debt? Are we going to cancel mortgage debt? And like saying all these wonderful things. And what are we going to do? Tax the rich to pay for it? To which
I love that.
Everyone just nodded. Yes, if you had run on this in 2012, you might have been president of the United States of America. Bill Kristol, did the whole, well, wouldn't it be better to cancel medical debt thing, as someone who clearly has no interest in canceling medical debt, probably has never said the words before.
I'm very excited about that because, as soon as the student debt thing is dealt with and we turn to medical debt, I'm expecting Bill Kristol to be out on the front lines with us calling for medical debt cancellation. Thank you so much, Bill.
Right. And, of course, the point is, I would absolutely prioritize medical debt. I mean, it shouldn't be a zero-sum game, and I obviously resent that choice to frame it that way. But, I get that a lot. A lot of people say, well, this isn't the most targeted thing to address the wealth gap, to address poverty. It's not the thing that we should prioritize. What about the children, et cetera, et cetera? And I think it's really important to address that point early on, which is to say, of course, I'm not arguing that it is. All I know is that Joe Biden has made it very clear that he can't do anything because you either believe that Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema and about 9 others are obstructing, or because you believe it's a very choreographed dance and they're playing rotating villain. Either way, nothing's happening. That's legislatively. We've made that very clear. And there are a limited world of things you can do by executive order. And this happens to be one of the best ones that would have an immediate impact for 44 million Americans who are disproportionately assetless.
It's just, this either or thing is just so obviously a tactic, right? As you said, like the people who are calling for this oftentimes have no actual interest in whatever the alternative that they're presenting is. Like, it's literally just trying to throw a wrench in the gears to say this good thing shouldn't happen because I can think of another good thing that, I also don't want to happen, but you should focus on that instead.
Yeah.
And no, you're absolutely right. Like, the fact is that there are 45 million people who are suffering under unjust debt for education, which should have been free in the first place. And this is a simple action that the president can do that would materially benefit the lives of all of these people, would actually harm no one except for maybe SoFi,
yeah.
a couple other scam companies. And, honestly would be the morally right thing to do, the politically the right thing to do. It would be beneficial for all of society, which would have all of these people freed up to actually do what they want with their lives instead of laboring under these chains of debt. And anything to say we should do something else instead is just total bullshit. Like, we could do whatever you're calling for and cancel student debt. It's not a reason not to cancel student debt.
Yeah, and to the extent that we're not doing that, it's because Congress won't do it, not because I'm not advocating for it at every opportunity, Yeah,
exactly. I don't actually want to fully concede that yet, because I do think there are things the president could do to have a big effect on medical debt. And I think that's something that I'm working on, that the Debt Collective is working on, that a lot of us who are working on student debt are working on.
Is it a secret, or are you guys waiting to drop something? Or
It's not a secret. I mean, we've been talking about it for a while. And, so for example, on the Current Affairs podcast back in December 2020, I had a conversation with Eli Massey and Astra Taylor and Elizabeth Brunig about this. And we kind of kicked around some ideas. And I think, that's still something that we're working on. It's definitely a lot more complicated than student debt, right? Like student debt, very, very simple, executive action, one signature, gone. Medical debt, much more complicated, and complicated because the federal government does not own the medical debt for the most part, whereas the federal government owns the vast majority of student debt. Like that's what makes it easy. But no, I mean, I just don't want to concede that you necessarily need Congress to have any effect, but it's more complicated. It's different. We can do both.
Well, one of the points of pushback that I think the most good faith of them all is the people who say, well, sure, maybe I'm for this in theory, but this doesn't get us anywhere without a whole system overhaul that involves free public college, getting rid of the kind of incentives of federally backed loans that have contributed to costs going up, bankruptcy reform so it's easier for people to discharge their student debt in bankruptcy, all of the things that have exacerbated this crisis. If we don't do anything about that, we're going to be in the exact same position we're in now. And what are we going to do? Just keep canceling student loans? And, one part of me just bristles because it's like, well, then you should have voted for Bernie Sanders. Because there was a comprehensive plan and I didn't used to have to defend against that point when I was, working on the campaign. I had an answer. It's like, yeah, we're dealing with all of it. But what do you say to people now, Sparky, who are concerned that this is just like a stopgap measure?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've got it exactly backwards. I think that there really is no way to push free college without canceling student debt and without canceling student debt first. Like that is the thing. If you actually believe that free college is the right way to do higher education, you have to believe that student debt is unjust, right? And if you want to actually motivate people to push for free college, if you want people to believe in free college and to believe that you believe as the president, as the Democrats in free college, you have to be doing everything you can to get there, which starts with what you can do right now, which is canceling student debt. I mean, it's very frustrating. It's almost the same point where it's like, we can't do this one good thing until we do all good things. And I just don't find it convincing at all. And, to add to that, Joe Biden could, in essence, create free college through executive action for as long as he's president, right? I mean, I laid this out in an article last year, but basically he could say, okay, I'm canceling all the student debt right now, and I'm going to promise to keep canceling student debt for as long as everybody's enrolled in the program that they're enrolled in now. And for everybody who enrolls after today, I'm going to cancel your debt if you enroll in a public program.
Yeah.
And that's it, and yeah, that's not permanent. It only applies as long as he or, probably another Democrat or at least a friendly person is in the White House. But if you wanted to actually convince people you were serious about free higher education, that's what you would do.
That's kind of incredible, actually. But I mean, I don't know why I hadn't thought about that. Just say, yes, the government will continue to pick up the tab for college because college should be free for these public institutions.
Yeah, if you Congress can act on it. Congress make this official, but I'm going to do it on my own for as long as I can do it.
What do you make of the $10,000 number? Because I had a very cynical thought the other day, which was, I don't know. I mean, the average debtor has $37,000, something like that, high 30s. But obviously there are a lot of people who have a whole ton, like six-figure debt, and many of those people are the worst off and from historically marginalized groups and women and all of those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And for people in that bracket, $10,000, it is almost a waste of money because it's like a year's interest. And the moratorium is a much bigger boon to that cohort than a $10,000 payment. And my cynical thought was, they know that. And they know that basically it's cheaper at this point to give everybody $10,000. Know that the government's just going to recoup it right back. I mean, people are just going to pay it right back in interest over the course of the first year that they're paying. And it's going to be a wash for the payments.
Yeah.
Am I being too cynical?
Let me ramp up the cynicism a little bit.
Oh, okay.
I mean, actually, a lot of those people are not going to pay it back because they're on the path to at least if the government was complying with its obligations, they are on the path to cancellation anyway. They're on the path to cancellation after 20 or 25 years on income-based repayment, or after 10 years on public service loan forgiveness. Now, set aside the fact that we know from the Government Accountability Office report that was released, I think last week, that there are a lot of problems with those programs, and it's going to be very difficult for them to actually live up to their obligations on those programs. They're trying.
So people who don't know what the problems are, can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. So since income-based repayment, or the broad category is called income-driven repayment, all of these things have very similar, very confusing names. But since we've had a system of doing payments based on people's income, there has been the program has included debt cancellation at the end of a period of time. How long that period of time is depends on what plan you're on, what type of loan you have, et cetera, et cetera. But generally, we're talking 20 to 25 years. If you're on income-based repayment for 20 to 25 years, at the end of that, the government is required to cancel whatever is left of your student debt, which oftentimes is much more than you started with, because usually your income-based payments are less than the interest that is accruing on your debt. So that already exists. It turns out, and many people knew this, but now it's very official because it came out in this GAO report, that the Department of Education wasn't actually tracking how many payments people were making on these plans, how long people spent in them. They were kind of assuming that the servicers would track it, but also weren't telling the servicers that they had to track it. And so actually, it's just a huge mess. And so we saw an announcement, this quote unquote IDR waiver, income-driven repayment waiver, that the Department of Education previewed last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, similar to the public service loan forgiveness waiver, where they're saying, okay, we're going to try to come up with some way to fix this to account for the fact that we don't even know necessarily what people are eligible for. But just to say, there's already cancellation baked in, right? And so if I'm on income-based repayment and I have a balance of, not even six figures, even if I just had 60,000.
Just a mere 60,000. Oh boy.
And you cancel 10,000 of it. But my payments are not even touching the interest. What does that mean? My payments are not going to change. My payments are going to be the exact same as they were before you canceled it. And all that's going to happen is that you are still going to cancel, if you fulfill your obligations, the remaining balance at the end of the 20 or 25 years or whatever. And so that's made absolutely no difference to me. It's also made absolutely no difference to the government. They're still canceling the total amount at the end anyway. It's just a matter of how long I suffer. The payments point is really, really important too, because so many people are on income-based repayment, right? It's I think it's more than 3/4 of people are either not in repayment or are on income-based repayment.
Yeah.
And so what that means is that for all of those people, unless you are getting full cancellation via the amount that's canceled, if you have less than $10,000 of debt, if you have more than $10,000 of debt, your payment's going to be exactly the same after $10,000 is canceled. And that is, to me, not a good way to do something good to say to people, yes, I'm canceling some student debt. By the way, your payment is exactly the same. And we know it's been off for 2 years. We're going to turn it back on. Nothing's going to actually change in your life. But I'm going to say that I canceled this amount of student debt. What the fuck?
That's such an important point, Sparky. Do you think that they are just so dumb over at the Department of Education that they don't realize this, or that they're doing it intentionally, that they're not actually trying to get away with messaging that looks like they're changing the status quo without doing anything at all?
I mean, I'm not an insider on this. My suspicion is that probably the people who are thinking about this, especially in the White House, do not actually understand how the repayment plans work.
This is not making a great case for us against the libertarians. I gotta say, government screwing the pooch like this so consistently is not helping us out. What you just said should be such a bigger piece of the conversation. And then maybe also, and I want to get your read on this. Look, some of the pushback that gets put out there isn't all bad faith. And there are people who say, okay, well, why aren't we having more of a conversation about lowering interest payments? Why is it that, I mean, I don't know what they are now, but when I was graduating from college, I have an 8% interest rate on my loans, Yeah. Why is it that lobbyists have bargained down, there's all this cultural pressure, political pressure to make sure that mortgage rates are affordable and all these other kinds of interest rates are set low because it's a middle class need, but not education rates? Why is it that there's a big difference between I can only just, write off $2,000 of my student loan interest, all my taxes, and only if I earn less than $60,000 a year. But if I were to buy a $750,000 house, I could write off all of that interest on my tax. Like, why are we talking about these kinds of things? Why aren't we talking about the income-based repayment system being fixed? And if the issue really is interest and how these payments are being structured, why not make the argument that, okay, let's discharge the debt for everyone who's already paid the principal, or like just cap it at the principal, or something like that is short of a jubilee. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that those are all fine, wonky points to make, but the big point for me is that education is a public good. And there's really I think that we could have very easily, when we were creating free public high school, not even that long ago, about 100 years ago, we could have decided that everybody individually needs to pay for their high school education, and then offered some kind of financing mechanism to do that, right? And we didn't. We decided that actually education is a public good. We're going to socialize this cost. We're going to all pay for everyone's education. And I think everybody basically, well, not everybody, most people basically agree now that that was the right thing to do. And we decided to do something different for higher education for various reasons, many of them very bad, including that we thought that students were getting too radical and rowdy. And we thought that, if we did too much public funding for higher education, that would mean that we'd have to integrate colleges, and oh, hell no, we don't want to do that, right? And so we're going to make this an individual obligation on the part of students, and then we're going to offer them a financing product that will allow, and really at the beginning, very much will allow private banks to make a profit off of them in interest without having any downside risk, because the federal government is going to guarantee those loans. So, I mean, the bigger picture for me is just that education is a public good, and education should be free, and we should provide it to everybody universally, like, period. And so that's why happy to kind of get into those arguments about the details, about the interest, about the repayment plans. But like, that's all after we've lost on the big fight.
Yeah, I hear you. I guess I'm only talking to you about this because this is like a safe space. I don't want to go out in the world and open the door to this stuff for the reasons that you just articulated, that we're trying to fight this bigger fight and not concede any ground prematurely. But I do worry that the 10,000 is such a nothing burger, and they're poised to celebrate it as such a victory that some of these alternatives I think are frankly better than the 10,000. Like, the interest stuff is better than the 10,000 for many, many people. And so I almost like, if it looks like we're going in that direction, I'm wondering if it's starting to be time to have that conversation.
Yeah, that's fair. And I don't know the answer to that tactically, although I will say that I don't think they actually can even tell how much of the balance is original principal versus interest at this point. That might be an unsolvable mystery, or would require like an insane amount of forensic accounting.
It's hard for me. It's hard to, like, if I go to Great Lakes, because at one point I just wanted to answer the question, like, have I paid the principal?
Yeah.
And I believe that I have, just based on like the math of it, just the this is where I started. I just did a calculator, and
right.
Exactly. I'm about right there at paying like the $180,000 or whatever. And when you do the interest calculator over a 10-year plan at the rate I was paying, even if I did everything perfectly and never took a job cut or anything, I was going to pay, I think, $250,000 for a $180,000 education, as compared to a rich person who pays $180,000 for $180,000.
Yeah, that's your poor person tax. That's your $70,000 poor person tax. Yeah.
And it's crazy to me that is also not a bigger part of the conversation. Like, why should Joe Biden's kids get a cheaper ride at Penn than like one of my very good friends who went to Penn who has $750,000 of debt?
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question, right? And it's also like, I think that sometimes people characterize this as like the federal government, taking our money, and like the federal government is taking our money. But remember, the federal government doesn't need your money, right? Like, this isn't actually helping anyone or anything. It's just purely, there's a bit of an aspect of it that's a historical accident, where the government created this program in order to benefit private banks at the beginning. And then over time, it kind of restructured in order to be that the government is giving out the loans directly. Still, and like, I think there are also many and complicated reasons why it maintained interest and why interest is so high, though I don't think that we should overrate the point that maintaining higher interest maintains the private market for student debt, including for private student debt refinancing. It's still a handout to private actors. But no, I mean, I think you're exactly right. It just is still, to me, the interest is like, it's the second injustice, or maybe it's the third injustice. The first injustice is the debt overall. So but here, let me give a slightly more optimistic take on the 10,000. Okay.
Okay.
Again, kind of save space here. Nobody's getting any credit for this, but I do think that there is going to be an aspect of victory in having the president, the White House, recognize that they can cancel debt, right? And they're going to cancel some chunk of it, and it's not going to be enough. And all of these people who are still maybe aren't even following this at all, or are still thinking that, maybe they're still following the Nancy Pelosi line that he doesn't have the power to do this or something like that, right? It's going to be a proof of concept for where the power actually is, what debt actually is. And, I hope that's going to be a very helpful and empowering move for all of our future efforts on student debt and every other kind of debt, right? To take this out of the realm of like, oh, this is just a private agreement that the government has nothing to do with. This is just, you agreed to it and now you've got to pay it back. Like, no, absolutely not. Every debt is a social obligation. Like, this is all within the context of the laws and our society, and we can change that at any time. And there are all these levers of power that we can pull. And so, yeah, 10,000 is bullshit. It's not nearly enough. And guess what? If you do 10,000, you're going to have 45 million, or I guess maybe, a few million will have their debt fully canceled. You're going to have, 35 million very pissed off people who understand what your power is now.
Yeah. I think there is something to that. I am worried how many libs, though, are so forceful arguing against the moral justification for doing this. And I am particularly plagued by I'm going to call it the Harvard question, because that's how it's put to me. And I have wondered sometimes, should I even talk about this anymore? Because my particular case is not especially sympathetic, obviously. And people are really hung up on this idea, this abstraction of some Harvard lawyer, doctor getting a boon, and I make that abstraction real by talking about it all the time, even though I'm a hyper minority of people in this situation. And I would also argue still have negative assets because of my debt, despite being, more liquid than a lot of other people. So part of why I think I'm invested in the interest question is because I think because we have this hierarchical educational system, if I'm going to be really honest, in a world where public colleges and universities were free, presuming that didn't create immediately a kind of equality, a flattening of all of the hierarchies that exist in education and the opportunities that come from getting an elite degree, I would still probably have gone to Harvard, right? Especially in a legal context where, there is a huge gap between the opportunities that are afforded to you if you go to a T14 school, a top 14 law school, versus all of the rest. It's way more extreme than the difference between going to Georgetown and Harvard. It's insane in the legal context. I mean, Georgetown is a T14 law school, but you get my point.
Yes.
And so in that case, I completely, I think, agree with the idea that that's my choice. And if I want to take on that debt, that's on me. But that doesn't get past what I still feel like is an usurious system that has my rich classmates paying less for a degree than I am. And that is why I think I still am invested separate and apart from the broader jubilee cancellation conversation, in a conversation about why it is that we have an incentive structure and a financing structure that makes it more expensive for people from middle class, working class, and poor families to get the kinds of education that we all have to admit does give you a real boost in life.
Yeah, although note that it's not actually the education that gives you the boost.
Right. It's the exclusivity of it.
It's the exclusivity of it. It's the cultural cachet.
Yeah.
It's all of the stuff that is, You know, it's all of the unjust parts of the hierarchy that are giving you the boost.
Totally.
I mean, you know, it's a good question.
But we both did it, Sparky.
I know. We
both went to those
We
schools.
totally did. No, it's absolutely true. I mean, if I could go back and do it again, I might not have.
Do you really believe that? Do you think that you got opportunities from having gone to an Ivy League law school that would have meaningfully changed your life for the worst if you hadn't done it?
So here's what I think for me personally, not that I think this matters for the larger conversation, but for me,
Sorry.
that's okay. For me personally, I think that I have certainly had opportunities by virtue of having Yale Law School on my resume that I would not have had if I had gone to even like UCLA, right? Which is the other main school that I was considering when I was considering law school. But I do think that if I had gone to UCLA, I probably would have gotten to where I am now and where I actually want to be faster, because I wouldn't have been kind of drawn in by these prestigious opportunities that are. Yeah.
I think that's fair. I think that's completely fair. Although I also think that I'm in this weird space, like, what is even my job? Like,
well, yeah, that's a little different.
But I do. Sometimes I was thought to myself, like, you know, I got hired from being a lawyer to being a senior politics editor at The Intercept, for which I frankly, you know, my quote unquote journalism career was like 7 articles for current affairs. You know what I mean?
They were really good articles, though.
I appreciate that, Sparky. And I think I obviously could do the job and did the job. But I do think that part of why I was afforded those kinds of opportunities was because people look at my resume and say, well, if she could handle Harvard Law, then she could do anything. Like, she could do all these other things. Would I be hired out of nowhere with no political experience, for better or for worse, to be Bernie's national press secretary, if not for having that kind of a resume? I don't know. Yeah. Maybe I would have. Simone Sanders' profile doesn't look like my profile, right? But I don't know.
No, I think it's a totally fair point, but I think that my main kind of gut response to this is I don't want to let all of the other extremely unjust aspects of our society dictate that what we do is we continue with another unjust aspect of it.
For sure. We need to ban Harvard. We need to that's another part of this conversation, which is, part of the boon of having free public colleges and universities is to get rid of the hierarchy that exists. You look at some of these Scandinavian countries where there's the 4 colleges and everyone goes to one of the 4, and maybe there's like a 10% difference in prestige between the best one and the worst one, but no one really cares.
Yeah. And I think there's the Finland model, which, as I understand it in very simplistic terms, is they just said no more private education. All education is public. Yeah. So that seems great to me and has gone very well for them. But my optimism about free public college is that it would follow essentially the same trajectory that free public high school followed, which is that, enrollment in high school went from 100% everybody who was going to high school was going to private school, and also it wasn't everybody, it wasn't very many people even, to now 90+% of people who go to high school go to public high school, and many more people go. I mean, obviously there's a little bit different there because it's legally required to go, but that would be my hope. That didn't happen instantly. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't like you wake up one day and it's like, okay, now we have free public high school, and there are high schools built, thousands, tens of thousands of high schools built all over the country, like buildings staffed with staff and teachers and all of that. But, I think that it did happen over the course of a few decades. And I think that's what I would like to see for higher education, is that once you have a good free option, and then we can keep working on all of these other aspects of our society that are relatedly unjust, that, this sort of credentialism, the bullshit, the signaling, continue to work on that. And down the line, I would like to see a situation where even if we haven't banned private education altogether, basically everyone has recognized that it's kind of a scam, and actually the free stuff is as good or better.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.